Hello and welcome to the shop. This week it's actually Thursday and I'm filming, and I usually am editing on Thursday, so this will probably publish on Sunday and or next week sometime. So if you're wondering where last week's video was, because there's a skip of 2 weeks, it's because I've spent a couple days doing some research and really thinking about how I was going to put this video together. I've got a lot of people following me on other social media platforms, and multiple new returners have asked if I would put together a video building a bowl, making a bowl, turning a bowl from beginning to end. Now, I tried to do that last week, but going into the bowl that I made last week, my intent, although I intended to do a kind of a bowl from A to Z video, because of the challenges I had with the bowl, it just didn't come together the way I felt was as all-encompassing as possible. Now, I want to preface this with saying a couple of things. First and foremost, I'm going to share what I've learned over the last number of years in watching countless videos of famous turners on YouTube doing their instructional videos. By no means is this the definitive way to make a bowl. This is how I make a bowl. I'm going to go through my thought processes when turning a bowl and share the techniques that I use that I have found to be most effective, including different grinds and things like that. Again, this is not the definitive way to make a bowl. These are the things I do when I put together a bowl. So take that as you will. This is primarily aimed at new turners who haven't ever turned a bowl before, who are familiar with the lathe maybe, but are nervous about taking that next step into turning cross grain and turning bowl. So also keep that in mind. There's a lot to cover here. I want to suggest, first of all, that there are some channels that may do this better than me. One that I relied on heavily when I was beginning was Worth the Effort, right here on YouTube. He does a very good job. His bowl turning videos are excellent. His gouge use videos and sharpening videos are very, very good. Again, even his aren't definitive, but if you want to start getting an idea and understanding of kind of the thought and theory behind turning bowls, please check out the channel Worth the Effort, and I will put a link in the description to his channel, as well as a few more I'm about to mention. The Wyoming wood turner, Sam Angelo. I absolutely love Sam's work, and if you go back in his archives, he's been making YouTube videos for a long time, and you go back in his archives and look at his bowl making videos, he does a very, very good job of describing the methods and tool use, and I mean, he goes so far as to break out a chalkboard and do diagrams and things like that. And it's well worth your time to go through Sam's library. Rod Humphrey, another excellent wood turner, and he does some very, very good bowl videos, and I just love watching the man. He's a fellow veteran, and he's an artist, and I just love watching his work. Of course, the famous names, Jimmy Clues. There are countless Jimmy Clues videos on bowl turning. There are countless Stuart Batty videos on bowl turning. I've been watching a lot of British turners lately, and of course I'm going to draw a blank on the one primarily that I've been seeing, because that's how my brain works. I'm going to put a list of different turners whose videos I watch in the description, and I really highly recommend that you invest some time, maybe just an hour and a half on a Friday night every other week, and just go through and watch some tutorial videos. There is an unbelievable amount of knowledge to be gained by watching YouTube turners, and some of these guys have been doing it for a long, long time, and have been presenting and teaching for a long time, and although I'll try to cover topics that they cover, they've been doing it longer than I have. So please learn from them. If you learn from me, take the time and go learn from them as well. One of the things that I think it's important to cover is the difference between dry wood, green wood, and aged wood that is not necessarily dry. This piece of cherry is dry. This piece of cherry exhibits some issues. There is the pith right there, and there's a big crack coming off of the pith. So obviously, if I put this piece of cherry on the lathe in order to turn a bowl, I'm going to lose at least the top inch of the wood here in order to turn away both the pith and this huge crack. However, once I get below that crack and towards the outer part of the log, I have plenty of opportunity to get a good solid bowl. There's another crack on this side, but I think in getting this round, that would mostly be turned away or could be dealt with if necessary. This is fully dry. This wood will not move very much, and this wood will be pretty stable in the lathe and being hollowed and turned into a bowl. There are some surface checks or cracks, but ultimately to get about a 6.5 or 7 inch bowl that's about 2.5 or 3 inches deep, I can turn away all of those cracks. Here I've got a pile of wood that is, although not dry, it is aged. So this wood has been down for a long time. This piece of cherry is a perfect example. And the outer edges, if you take this hatchet and do a little, are punky and rotten. However, you get inside about a 1/2 inch, you start getting good solid wood. This wood is aged. This wood has been sitting for years, but it is not dry in the sense that when you put a moisture meter to it or you start turning it, you will not get some humidity or moisture off of it. That being said, because this wood has been sitting for years on the ground, it's as, I would say that it is as tempered as it can be without putting it in a kiln in the environment here in the humidity of North Carolina. Here I've got a mixture of green wood, dry wood, and aged wood. And I want to give you another example. This is a piece of black locust from my yard. This tree has been down obviously for years. It is aged, it is weathered. It is tempered, it is cured, if you will, but it is not dry. It's not green, it's wet. So the characteristics of this are going to be a lot different than the characteristics of green wood. Green wood has been cut down recently enough that the cells of the tree are still trying to transport water, still holding liquids, nutrients, and things like that. As that begins to dry, the core, the heart, the depths of the wood lose that moisture. It starts to slowly creep out to the outside, in general an inch per year. And then ultimately, if it's on the ground and it's getting rained on and it's getting exposed to weather, this wood becomes wet, like this piece of black locust. It is not green, but it is wet. Now, that black locust is very hard, it's very dense wood, and it's very, very hard. Wet black locust, not green, but wet, exhibits the same characteristics as dry black locust in that you're dealing with the hardness, which is much harder when it's wet or dried than when it is green. If you have the opportunity to turn black locust, I highly suggest that you, if possible, rough turn your bowls green. You're going to have a lot better time dealing with the toughness of that particular wood. It's very hard and dense wood. You're going to have a lot easier time if you turn it green. Now over here I do have a mixture of dry and green woods, mostly green, but I do have some dry woods over here. When I received this wood, it was a gift from Mark Soleil. Thank you very much, Mark. He had already sealed the ends. This is ambrosia maple, and even though the ends are sealed and this is drying very slowly, it was green when I received it much earlier this year. or late last fall, months ago. It was green. It is drying slowly, and so this still would qualify as green wood. The ends are sealed, so this is going to cut a lot easier and a lot smoother than it does when it's dry. That being said, dry maple cuts very well. It's just a little harder and a little denser than green maple or wet. Green, not wet. There's a difference between green and wet. It turns a little bit harder than green maple. For the purpose of the video today, I'm going to use this dry piece of walnut. Now, this piece of walnut exhibits characteristics both of being fully dried, but it also spent some time aging on the ground, so it'll be a bit tempered as well. Now, although all woods, to the extent of my knowledge, turn easier green, walnut usually turns very well as long as you keep your tools sharp and pay attention to what you're doing, how you approach the piece with your tools. Walnut turns very, very well. It comes out beautifully, and it's just a good, fun wood to turn. I will caution you, understand the woods that you are turning because they can be toxic. Walnut is acidic, so I highly recommend that you use some kind of air filtration while you turn. I will be wearing a Trend Air Pro N95 mask that has positive air pressure in the mask and filters the air so that I'm not breathing the dust. Other woods that could be quite toxic, cedar, catalox, sycamore. There are multiple. So do a little research when you decide to turn a bowl and you're going to use a big piece of wood. Do some research about the safety precautions necessary to turn that wood. For bowls, the absolute bare minimum is safety glasses, plastic lenses, shatterproof lenses. I do very strongly recommend, and most of the, if not all of the time when I'm turning bowls, I do wear a face shield of some kind. This one is from Uvex. I get it on Amazon. It's very inexpensive, and replacement screens are not difficult to, it's not difficult to replace the screen, and they're inexpensive, and you can order them also on Amazon. There is a link to this particular face shield, one of my affiliate links, in the description. I will, like I said, because I'm turning walnut and I am developing an allergy to walnut, I will be using my Trend Air Pro, which is also a face shield, full coverage face shield, but it's also a positive air filtration system. When turning a bowl, you want to use a bowl gouge. The characteristics of a bowl gouge are a little bit different than those of a spindle gouge. For example, this spindle roughing gouge is actually a curved piece of flat steel, so it has a very thin, very narrow neck, and this is a dangerous point. It is a point of potential failure. When you are turning cross grain, you are getting massive amounts of leverage and pressure in this orientation, pounding down on the tip of the tool. This can weaken this piece right here, which is just as thick as whatever the steel is, and can ultimately snap this, launching the tool, which is sharp, in some direction in your shop. Do not use a roughing gouge, a spindle roughing gouge, or many spindle gouges if they are basically a curved piece of flat steel or a portion of a tube. Do not use them on bowls. It is dangerous. That being said, I've seen a professional bowl turner who's been doing it for years, and I can't remember his name, but who does finishing slices, finishing cuts on the outsides of his bowls with a spindle roughing gouge. There is an exception to every rule, but if you're going to make a decision like that, go into that open-eyed and understanding the risk that you are exposing yourself to. Is the bowl worth taking that risk? Maybe not. Something to think about. Now, not all spindle gouges can't work on bowls. This is a Robert Sorby 3/8 inch spindle gouge, and this is a solid tube all the way through into the handle of the tool. This although it is a much wider, more open and shallow flute, this is perfectly safe to use for things like doing detail work or cleaning up the tenon on the bottom of a bowl. Fine detail work. You're not going to remove massive amounts of wood using this tiny little spindle gouge. But for detail work and little, small adjustments and things like that, you can use this gouge. Again, this is my experience. You may have a different experience, and I am certainly not the authority on this, but these are my experiences, and I can tell you that because of the way that spindle gouge is built, it's safe for detail work on a bowl. Now, bowl gouges. The bowl gouge is essentially a solid tube or solid rod of steel, high-speed steel, that then has a flute cut out of it. This is a Thompson half-inch bowl gouge. The British would call this a 3/8 inch bowl gouge because they gauge it on the opening of the flute, not the width of the shaft. This happens to be sharpened with a winged fingernail grind or an extended fingernail grind at 45 degrees. I've found that for many, many tasks, 45 degrees and a fingernail grind is what works for me. That doesn't mean that's the be-all, end-all. That's just what I'm most comfortable with and am able to perform the most delicate cuts and the finest slicing cuts with. This is a Thompson 5/8 inch bowl gouge with the deep V, and I have a modified Ellsworth grind or Irish grind on it. Modified because my sharpening system isn't capable of letting me get it swung all the way around to get the very, very deep wings. So you could call this an extended fingernail grind if you wanted. It's arguable. It doesn't matter. What matters is, am I able to use this grind to produce a fine cut on the bowl? Is it effective? And if not, what do I need to do to fix that? Is it my technique? Is it my sharpening? Is it I'm just not able to do it? Do I need to do a little more studying? These are all questions to ask. I'm finding with the 60 degrees on the nose that this is a very versatile tool. It's a very versatile grind. And I primarily use it because this has got the longest handle of my tools. This is primarily my roughing tool. It's got the thick 5/8 inch shaft. The British, I guess, would call this a half-inch because of the flute, the width of the flute. But we call this a 5/8 inch bowl gouge. It's got the thick, heavy shaft, and the 5/8 inch can take the wildest of cross grain off balance. It's a strong, sturdy tool, and it can take the abuse of some of the weirder types of turning that you might get into. Square bowls, crotch pieces where grains go in every different direction. This is a good, sturdy tool. I also have a 5/8 inch Sorby, which is also called, again, the British do it different. They call this a 13 millimeter. Again, heavy shaft, high-speed steel. This has got a 40/40 grind, and then I ground the heel off. So this is just a long-winged 40/40 grind, and I will go through sharpening that. But then I ground the heel off so that I'm not digging that heel into the wood and bruising the wood. I just have about 1/8 of an inch of cutting edge here on the 40/40 grind. We're primarily probably going to do push cuts with the 40/40 grind on this bowl, just for the sake of teaching you probably one of the most universally used bowl grinds, at least in the United States. In my experience watching countless videos, most bowl turners are going to whip out a 40/40 gouge at some point. Does that mean it's the only gouge or the only way? No, that's just what is the most common practice in my observation here in the United States. Now, this is a Hurricane. This is another 5/8 inch, and this is a traditional or English grind. This is my bottom feeder gouge. That is a 60-degree bevel, and you literally put this on the sharpening tool in a V brace and sharpen it this way. This grind is the traditional English grind. and has been used for a long time to turn. Don't discount it because it's old. It was used for hundreds of years for a reason, and it is an effective use of the tool, and it does a good job, especially coming down across the bottom of a bowl and getting a nice even surface. Once I learned about the bottom feeder, I have not turned back from using this almost exclusively in the bottoms of bowls. Other tools that you can use, parting tools. This is just a nice Sorby 6¼ millimeter or 6mm ¼ inch parting tool. Pretty effective tool. We're going to use that when we get into discussion about recesses and tenons in holding the bowl for when you hollow it. Don't discount the scraper. This is a useful tool, I have seen turners who use a scraper almost exclusively to hollow bowls. It's an interesting concept. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I understand the usefulness of the scraper. It depends on how my turning is doing, how my cuts are, if I'm able to get good, clean slices. If I can get a good, clean slice, if everything, the stars are aligned, I'm holding the tool well, I'm using the tool well, I may not ever pull out the scraper. However, the scraper is effective when you just can't get the tool to cut the way you want it. You're getting tool marks and things like that. This can save your bacon and save a bowl. So do definitely look into having some good scrapers available to you. This is from Hurricane. It's not a bad scraper. It's good and heavy. I think it's a 2-inch, 1.5-inch scraper. I'm not sure. It's beefy. It's big. It's heavy, which means that especially on a wider bowl, I have a good solid tool so that I can use my other hand to support the bowl as I'm scraping, and I'm not worried about this swinging around. The weight of the tool carries such that I'm not worried about fighting any of the forces as I go along scraping that bowl. It's not going to be a challenge for me because I have good weight behind me. This might not always be the right curvature, however, so I do suggest you have a couple of different size scrapers. This is a 1-inch, and this is a great for that inside corner. Just can't get the tool around. You're just not getting the right curvature. This might fit. I also have a 1/2-inch scraper that would not be it. A 1/2-inch scraper that I turned into a negative rake scraper, 45 degrees here, 15 here, I believe, and then I gave it a curvature so that it's an inside corner or inside wall scraper. It works again in certain situations where I just can't get that corner to make the shape I want, or I just can't reach a tool mark with a traditional gouge or a larger scraper. That might get in there and do the job. There's a lot of discussion and a lot of argument about negative rake versus standard scraper grinds. I'm not going to argue it. I use both. I use whichever one gets the job done for me, so I'm not going to argue whether one is better than the other. I use a mixture. I use what works appropriately. One thing you will not see me use on a bowl unless there is a extreme reason is carbide. Why? I have carbide tools. I have turned bowls with carbide tools. It is certainly doable, and if that is the tool usage that you choose, more power to you. I choose to use traditional tools, and rather than scraping the wood, because essentially carbide is a scraper, I prefer to slice the grains of the wood. It gives me a cleaner look, a cleaner piece, and a lot less sanding. Now, for hollowing and things like that, carbide is absolutely appropriate. There's not a better scraper in my opinion, and in my experience, I haven't been able to find a better tool for hollowing to a certain depth than a carbide scraper. At a certain depth, you need different tools. I don't have necessarily the appropriate tools to do it. I do use a one-way termite, which is a little hollow, angled, sharpened tube. This works very well deep, where my carbides, the carbides I own anyway, aren't long enough to get in there. I am looking into some kind of a hollowing system, whether it be the traditional high-speed steel or a carbide hollowing system that gives me a little bit more reach, because even the termite has its limitations as far as depth, and the termite likes to catch. But that's hollowing, and we don't necessarily need to worry about that when we're turning a bowl. Now, that's a lot of talking, and I'd like to get to turning and get to showing you some specifics, but in doing some demonstrations and showing you some specifics, I'm going to have to do a lot more explaining. I'm going to do my best to set links in this video. It's a new technique on YouTube I'm learning, so that you can skip forward to the good parts, but please don't skip the stuff, the information that you need. If you're not experienced in turning bowls, this video is for you, and it would probably be to your best interest to watch it from beginning to end, and then go back to the parts if you need to, in order to see something you may have missed. Now, we're going to talk about holding your piece. I'm going to get a couple of little demonstration pieces and show you the difference, and we're going to talk about tenons, recesses, or neither when it comes to holding a bowl on the lathe. Now, in order to demonstrate the difference between a tenon and a recess or mortise when holding a bowl, I'm going to turn an example of each on this little piece of wood. I believe this is Spanish cedar. I'm going to turn a tenon on this side, but what I wanted to point out before I get started is that I am holding this between centers. I have a steb center, drive center here on the drive end, and then a 60-degree live center here. You can hold a piece of a log or a large bowl blank between centers in order to establish a manner to hold it. Lyle Jamieson, for example, a very famous bowl turner, starts all his bowls from a log between centers. It is doable. It helps you find balance in the grain and things like that. It is a very, very useful technique to learn. However, it is a technique that takes a little bit of knowledge. If you are inexperienced, if you're not sure what you're doing, I do not recommend that you start holding your piece between centers. And I'm going to demonstrate holding it with a woodworm screw once I get this turned and do a quick discussion of the difference between a tenon and a mortise for holding a bowl on a chuck. Here you will see I have created a dovetail tenon with the sides sloped slightly inward. The type of chuck I use is the Nova G3, and it has an interior and exterior dovetail. So a very useful tool to use is your skew in a negative rake scraper orientation, set flat on the tool rest, and you can come right in as it's turning and cut a tenon that's very close to the tenon shape of the dovetail. You can also get specialized dovetail tools or make a specialized tool to create this dovetail. I have two Nova G3 30th anniversary edition chucks. I really, really like this chuck. I have a MIDI lathe. This is the Laguna 1216. And it has a 1 in 8 TPI, 1 inch. Well, I'm drawing a blank. 1 inch drive. So that is a 1 inch in diameter, threaded at 1 inch, 8 threads per 1 inch drive center. And so this screws on. It doesn't need an adapter or anything. If you buy it, make sure you buy, when you look at whatever brand chuck, I'm not saying buy a Nova, I'm saying when you buy a chuck, make sure that you either match or that there is an adaptation collar that you can fit the chuck on the size of your drive, your spindle. If you have the wrong size chuck to fit the spindle, you're wasting money and you're going to have to return it, and it's a big pain in the neck. Some chucks do come with adapters so that you can step up or step down the size. Some do not. So make sure that your chuck's going to fit your spindle. Now, like I said, this has dovetails on the jaws, and I will show you on my second chuck one of the same size jaws. These are the 60 millimeter jaws. So you can see the dovetail shape there, and so you can see that I cut a dovetail corresponding, and see how it fits? You can just see, maybe I can get a little better light here. You can just see how that dovetail fits exactly on the inside there of the jaw of that chuck. Likewise, and that's about a 15-degree angle, which is the same angle that my skew, my half-inch skew, is sharpened at. It's about 15 degrees. So when I came in, just running the skew straight down, just like that, it cut a 15-degree angle, which precisely matches the angle of the inside of that mortise. This would be the mortise, that dovetail, that tenon fits that mortise. You'll notice also that I didn't go so deep that the bottom of my tenon is resting down here in the bottom of the jaw. You do not want that. You want this shoulder right here, this machined shoulder, to meet the machined edge where you just did with your tools, the machined edge of the wood. You want a gap here, because what you want is to hold this wood right here at the strongest point. You don't want to bottom it out where it might not be level, it might not be even, and you might be off kilter because this may not be perfect. You want it right up there, just like that. You have plenty of room underneath here. I could go deeper, and there are little jaws down here, little teeth you can see, so I could go a little deeper and the teeth could grab, but that's not necessary. You only need about 3/10 of an inch. Actually, we'll measure it. You don't need much. I'm sorry, not 3/10 of an inch, 3 millimeters in inches. According to my vernier caliper, the depth here is, go the right way, hang on, this caliper's fighting me. I'm fighting me with this caliper. Here we go. Okay, so according to the caliper, we are looking at, in hundredths, we're looking at, what is that, 10, 12, 14, 16 hundredths of an inch, just a little over an eighth of an inch, almost 3/16 of an inch, right in there. That's the only depth, about 3/16 of an inch. That's as deep as that needs to go for both mortise and tenon in order for these type of jaws to hold effectively. So like I said, you want this surface here, the shoulder of the jaw, to hit the shoulder of the wood. You do not want the tenon to bottom out, and then you want to tighten down on that tenon to hold the piece. Now I'm going to give you a quick tip before we get to the bowl, because this is the way you're going to mount a bowl, and that is when you're mounting a tenon or a mortise, bring up your tail center, loosen it, drive the piece onto the shoulders so that the shoulders meet shoulder with your tail center, and then tighten it. This ensures that you are exactly level, exactly flat on there. Flat surface, flat machine surface to flat machine surface, and this is going to make sure that you have the best hold, and this is going to help ensure that you are aligned and that your piece is square to the lathe. Now we're going to cut a mortise on this side, and then I'm going to give you a little description of what the benefits and drawbacks are of each, especially when it comes to holding a bowl. You'll notice again I used my skew in a negative rake scraper orientation and came right down the wall and established that angle, this time angling outwards. Again, a roughly 15 degree angle, which matches the outside of the jaw of the mortise, or of the the outside of the jaw of the chuck. Remember I showed you the dovetail jaw, and this is the new version of the 30th anniversary G3 Nova chuck, and it does not have it, but on the older version there is a slight tooth, a raised tooth here. Now, regardless of whether it has the raised tooth or not, one of the disadvantages on cross grain, you see the grain is running this way up and down, one of the disadvantages of using a tenon on cross grain is simply that all the pressure is coming down shearing, right? Shearing across that grain. And now I'm just using my hand, but I can also use my hammer, my mallet. Doesn't take much for that grain lengthwise to rip. When you are holding a cross grain bowl with the tenon, this can shear that tenon very easily with the forces that are created when you are cutting a bowl. Now, a recess or mortise, although it does have that shearing capability on the ends of the grain, see it there, is much, much sturdier on the sides. I can shear it, I can break it, but I had to apply far more force. I couldn't do it with my bare hand. I had to bring a mallet into play. So there is much more strength on the sides. You do have the same weakness here, yes, but there is much more strength on the sides, and it's a lot harder for that to break out. Can it break out? Absolutely. But that depends, when you are hollowing the bowl, on how you handle your tools and whether or not you are fighting versus slicing the wood. The next thing you need to take into consideration when you're turning a bowl is the size of your lathe, especially for you beginners. Oftentimes beginners don't have larger lathes. This is a Laguna 1216, meaning it has a 6-inch distance from the center of the spindle to the bedway of the lathe. It is actually in fact a little bit further, but for safety considerations you will consider that at 6 inches from the center of the spindle to the bedway of the lathe. That means at the widest point, when you put a piece of wood on there, it can be no longer than 12 inches. Well, this is 13, so I can already tell, in order to safely cut a 12-inch piece of wood, I have got to knock the corners off of this piece of wood. If you have a bandsaw, you can find a center and cut your blank round. If you don't have a bandsaw, you can at least make it octagonal in order to clear your lathe bed and be able to turn this piece. So that is something when you're selecting a piece of wood to take into consideration, is to measure it out and make sure that at its widest point it will clear the bedways of your lathe. Okay, so I've set my divider at 5 inches, just a hair outside of it. Let me get back in there. Set my divider at 5 inches, remembering that my widest point roughly is at 10 inches, so I'm taking half of it, and I'm going to center up as best I can, and I'm just going to touch the edges and see if I'm centered, and I'm a little bit off. There we go. Okay. So, I'm just going to scribe a line. It gives me a 12-inch or 10-inch in diameter circle. That is the absolute outside diameter my bowl could possibly be. Now, it's going to be a little bit smaller than that. It'll probably, once it's all said and done and fully turned, be about 9.5 inches across. I also need to make sure that I very firmly establish that center. I don't want to lose it. You see, I had a little false center there where I missed. That's the real center. I want to make sure I establish that center. So another thing I can do is take some kind of a center punch or awl. I made this. This is a 16 penny nail. I drove into a knob that I turned, and then I simply took it over to my grinder and sharpened it. So you want to give a good indentation in the center. Usually I whack that with my mallet, but my mallet's over there. Then safely, either with a handsaw or however you do it, bandsaw, whatever your method is, at least get this octagonal, cut the corners off so that you can make sure, because we're at about 13 inches here. This will not clear, yeah, that's 16 inches almost. This will not clear the rails from corner to corner. So I at least need to cut this off octagonally so that I can make sure that this bowl will spin. Okay. So I went to the saw and cut the corners off, and I'm roughly 10, I mean it's a little wider at some places, but again, what my biggest concern is that I don't breach 12 inches, and I'm just at 11 at the widest points here, so I'm safe. Now, there are several different ways to hold a piece of wood on the lathe to turn a bowl. There's a lot of discussion about what's safe, what's not safe. There are a lot of ways to do it. Lyle Jamieson circumvents the issue altogether by putting a waste block on a faceplate and gluing the bowl blank to the waste block. That's one way to do it. You can also, another thing he does is starts between centers, turns the outside of the bowl, turns a tenon on the base of the bowl, and glues that to a waste block on a faceplate. You can also go straight into a bowl with a faceplate. Most lathes come with a faceplate, and this is perfectly viable. However, you can't just use any screws. Drywall screws will snap. Deck screws are a little bit stronger, but they'll snap. You need to find good quality wood screws to put in there, and you don't always have them around, or if you do, and you do break one, digging a broken screw out of a bowl is a serious pain in the neck. So the guys that make tenons came up with a solution. And that is the woodworm screw. Or screw chucks. There's so many other ways. There are other ways to do this. I prefer to use the woodworm screw. I have had woodworm screws fail due to the quality of the wood. So the first thing to take into consideration if you're going to use a woodworm screw to hold your piece is, can the wood support it? Now I usually, if I'm using a half a piece of wood, I usually start, this is the inside of the bowl, and I usually will get the piece of wood as close to level as I can using the railway of the wood. Now for design purposes, I want to make a good, smooth, even edge bowl, so I'm going to turn from the outside in and kind of follow the shape. I mean, I'm going to shape it a little, but I'll roughly follow the shape of the sides of the log. If I was going to do a natural edge bowl, I would establish a flat spot here, put my woodworm screw in, and then I would come up and I would have the natural edge. Now the reason I'm not doing a natural edge log here is because this was, again, a piece on, or a bowl here is, again, this was a piece that was on the ground. So you can see this is actually rotten. So I've got rot about 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 an inch in. So that won't hold up to being the edge of a bowl. I'm going to have to turn all of that away in order to have a good bowl. This is all good solid wood. Only the outer edges are rotten. So get this as close to flat as you can. I'm lucky in that this piece was cut really nicely. I got this from Bart at Logs of Treasure, and he did a really good job. Take a 5/16 inch. Now, this depends on the brand. This is for my Nova G3s. Okay, my Nova G3s, I drill a 5/16 inch hole. Roughly, the older one, again, this all depends on the era of your Nova G3. You can see this is the older one, it's deeper. This is the newer one, it's a little bit shorter. I'm going to use the newer woodworm screw, so I only need to drill about 1 inch deep, maybe 1 1/4 inches, straight in. Now you don't want to go too deep, but about 1 1/4 inches is good. Maybe 1.5 inches if I was using the larger one. Now, when you put your woodworm screw in your chuck, you'll notice here you have flat sides. Those correspond with flat sides inside your chuck. You want to make sure you place those so that those flat sides on the chuck close. So you can rotate and you can feel it. That's one way to do it. Another thing you can do is get the chuck mostly close, and you can spin it a little, and you'll actually feel those flat sides set in securely. So if you back it off a hair, you can actually feel it where it wants to go and set in securely. You also want to pull that woodworm screw in that little flange there as far forward in the chuck as possible. What holds your bowl is the leverage force of the wood threaded on the screws against this shoulder. So it's important to have a flat or relatively flat surface, because what's going to hold the bowl is the force of the bowl being pulled against the shoulder, and it's going to be the friction of the bowl against the shoulder that holds the piece in place and on the wood. Softer woods can tear out the woodworm screw. This is good, dry, solid walnut. I don't have a fear of that happening. Cherry, hard maple, even soft maple, I don't have a fear of that happening. Now, cedar, I don't usually use a woodworm screw. Just depends on the cedar. It really depends on the wood. But you see, one, I clear my lathe bed all the way around, and I'm on, and I locked my spindle, and I really push that on there so that I'm creating the maximum amount of friction. Now remember, this is going to be spinning in this direction. The threads, turning it clockwise to thread it on, it's all the force is going to be pushing that on harder. So that is also a benefit to help. Another thing you can do that I always recommend to do is bring up the tailstock to increase the amount of safety. Until I have to take that tailstock away, I'm going to leave that tailstock on there while I'm shaping this bowl. When you put the bowl on, if your bowl is approaching the maximum size of your lathe, make sure that you get your banjo out of the way first. And usually you want to take your tool rest off while you're moving all of this stuff around. It's not an absolute, but it's pretty smart to get your tool stock out of the way when you get everything set up and get it balanced, or your tool rest out of the way when you get everything set up and get it balanced. I'm going to bring up my tail center. Now I broke off my little locking knob. I need to get a replacement. I'm going to bring up my tail center, and I'm going to drive it in. Okay, and that's going to help hold and make sure it's secure. I'm going to make sure that my banjo is clear. I'm going to turn my lathe all the way down, and I'm going to start it and bring the speed up slowly and check my balance. This is a little bit off balance. This is a midi lathe. It's a smaller lathe, so I have to be careful. If I had a bigger lathe, like say a robust American Beauty, I wouldn't be very worried about turning this up, because this little amount of weight on a 900-pound lathe isn't going to make it rattle. However, you can hear this starting to get a little shake, rattle, and roll. I'm up at about 650 RPM, and until I get this in the round and balanced, that's about as fast as I'm going to be able to go. Thankfully, it's not going to take me very long to get this balanced. Let's talk about sharpening real quick. It's the elephant in the room. It's the question every beginning turner asks. How do I sharpen? What do I sharpen to? I'm not going to tell you to sharpen to X, Y, or Z. I'm going to tell you what I use. And I told you at the beginning of this video, I'd be using the Robert Sorby 4040 grind the most. So in order to sharpen it, I use the Robert Sorby Pro Edge. I do not have a grinder at this time. This is an excellent sharpening system. I have nothing wrong with this system, except that I cannot get a true Ellsworth grind. And the reason I can't get a true Ellsworth grind is this mechanism right here that holds my gouge, hits the sides, no matter what I do, hits the sides, and I can't get swung all the way around where you have clearance and you don't have that issue where you're hitting with a grinder, with a wheel grinder. I am going to get a wheel, but that doesn't mean I'm going to stop using my Pro Edge. I'm just going to use each for a different application. Now, the way this system works is you have a measuring piece here that you can buy that when you set your gouge in, lock it into the holder here, that's going to give me 40 degrees on the tip. I have, this is the extended fingernail, it's called extended fingernail grind. So there's a strict 40-40. That's all I would need to get a strict 40-40. That's a medium length grind. This is the long length or longer wing grind. I prefer the longer wing grind. So this is not necessarily I guess if you wanted to call it a true 40-40, it has longer wings. Simply going to touch it on one side. Touch it on the other, through up the middle. Now remember, I turned away the shoulder. So I just touch that up a little bit freehand, make sure that the shoulder is clear, and I have about an 1/8 inch of cutting surface at the 40-degree angle, 40 degrees this way, 40 degrees this way, and that is my 40-40. This is what works for me. You may choose not to turn away the heel. That's up to you. This is simply what I do so that I'm not digging that heel in and grinding away and bruising the wood. Once again, safety related, at the minimum, you need safety glasses, safety squints. You need plastic and Z-rated glasses. At the minimum. I highly recommend, if you are cutting a cross-grain bowl, that you wear a face shield at all times. With walnut, I recommend that you use filtration, whether it's an N95 mask or, like I have, a powered air filtering face shield. Doesn't matter, but protect yourself, protect your lungs. I will be pausing often to describe what's happening because I am wearing a powered face shield, and you're just going to hear me sounding like Darth Vader if I don't stop, tip it up, and to tell you what is going on. Now I'm at this angle, and I'm not sure how long I can hold it without clobbering the camera, but I want you to see how the tool approaches the wood. Again, for the sake of this video, I am using a 40-40 grind that I have simply taken the heel off of. That's the only thing different than a straight up 40-40 grind. And what I'm going to do is start here at the outer edges, and first things first, soften this corner. I've got my tool rest set so that the tool cuts roughly at the center. Might need to lower it just a hair. So I don't want to cut above center, I want to cut at center. And I'm going to be working from the outside edge. We do everything backwards when we're wood turners. We're going to start on the outside. You can see how soft that is. You can see how punky this outer layer is. I need to get to good solid wood. I need to start knocking this edge off, and I need to start getting my shape on the outsides of the bowl. This, in the process, as I'm taking these corners off, is going to start to push me towards round. Face shield on. power filtration. Okay, hopefully you could hear the transition as we got away from this softwood and into the good hard wood. You can actually see a line here. You can see where the rot is outer. I'm hoping I can keep a little bit of that line because it's a neat feature, but I don't want to keep any of the punkiness. Now, as I was using the tool, my left hand holds the tool down. It does not guide the tool. It is simply used to hold the tool down on the rest as I move it. For this particular function, I am doing a little bit of a pull and to push. It's going to kind of transition into a push as I come around the corner, but what I'm really trying to focus on is just removing bulk. I need to get this to a point where I'm going to have a round shape and this bowl is going to be in balance. The tool rest is there to rest my tool. It is not a hand rest. I don't want to get anchored here. I am simply using my left hand to hold the tool down. My right hand is guiding on this pivot, and this slight movements of my right hand is what is directing the tool. This is ring shake. This is a crack in the grain, in the curvature, where the tree, maybe when it was falling or something, or maybe from just wind and regular interaction, that actually caused a crack in the tree. This is dangerous. If I do not clear this away, if I don't turn this away, and I get to the thin walls of a bowl, this could cause the bowl to explode. Luckily, it is close enough to the outer edge and to the rot that it most likely will get cleared away. Be aware of this. It's a little bit in here, but it's not actually cracking the piece. This will probably get cleared away and turned away. This could determine whether or not you have a successful bowl. It looks like it shallows out and it doesn't pass all the way through. I don't think it's going to necessarily interfere with the final piece. Be aware of the actual properties of the grain of the wood. This may or may not determine whether a bowl is smaller or how thin you turn a bowl. And sometimes you just have to say discretion is the better part of valor and walk away from a piece of wood because it's too dangerous to make into a bowl. For safety, as soon as you get your bowl as close to the final round piece as possible, this is rot and I have to turn this away.
This is not rotten, but I don't want to necessarily include it. The ring shake is almost all gone, but I'm going to lose this in order to lose that. But for safety, this edge is sharp. If I were to hit this edge while this bowl is spinning at 800 or 900 RPM, I would cut myself. For safety, come in with your gouge. Here, you can rest your hand and just ease that little corner. You can also come in this way. A little more difficult, but what you just want to do is round that off. That's going to be, because this isn't perfectly level, you're going to end up turning all of that away anyway, but you want to soften that a little bit so that you don't end up, if you accidentally bump this edge, you could cut yourself very badly and bleed all over your bowl, and you certainly don't want that.
One of the advantages of the 40/40 grind is these wonderful shavings. And there's nothing like getting a good handful of consistent, clean shavings. You can see that we've got fairly clean cuts here. I'm going to clean it up a little bit. I'm going to smooth it out a little bit. I'm going to take a couple of finishing passes with a freshly sharpened gouge. But these shavings are very rewarding, and you get them from a 40/40 grind very easily. You can get them with other grinds. Use the grind that best suits you. But the 40/40 does cough up some really nice shavings. Now you can see I got a lot of tool marks and things. I am going to use my 1/2" bowl gouge with my 45-degree angle for my finishing cuts, simply because this is the gouge that works best for me. You don't have to. You can get a good final finishing cut with a 40/40 grind. I'm simply going to use the 1/2" because it is what I am most comfortable with and I get the finest cuts with, so that I can get the cleanest cut possible. The ring shake is gone. I was able to turn it away, thankfully, so I'm not necessarily concerned. And you can see I gave myself a little lip shape here, which you can also see is going to give me a thickness of roughly 3/8 of an inch. Not 3/8 of an inch. Ha! 3 millimeters. Roughly 3/16 of an inch thick, a little tiny bit thinner. And that's probably the thickness I'm going to go shoot for the whole bowl. You do not have to do that. That's just what I'm aiming for. Now, we need to talk about how we're going to reverse this, how we're going to mount it. I demonstrated the difference between the tenon and the recess. There's a third way I can mount it, and that is I can use a glue chuck. What I can do is flatten this bottom off, put a sacrifice block in the chuck, and glue, when I reverse this to that sacrifice block. For the sakes of this video, am going to cut a recess into the base of this bowl, so I have to work the shape a little. I definitely have to flatten it off. And then I'm going to cut a recess and have to leave myself a little bit of a lip. And I'm going to do something that is called a floating illusion, where I'm going to give it a foot. It's going to come flat out towards the outer edge, and then it's going to start to curve. So when you set the bowl down, it looks like it's floating just the slightest bit above the bottom of the bowl, above the bottom of the table. So that's just some design considerations to think of. I like where this is going. It's reflecting the shape of the log. That's how I got this shape. I like this shape. I want to try to keep that and emphasize the natural shape of the log. I have a little tiny touch of the sapwood, which will darken as it ages, but ultimately I think I'm really quite pleased with the coloration here. Now I do have a bit of tear out, and again, I don't generally use the 40/40 grind all the time, so I'm a little rusty, and that's why I'm getting tear out. I am going to use my 1/2" with a 45-degree fingernail with long wings grind, and I should be able to clean that up with a very light cut, a light pass, and get that nice and clean and no tear out. This is where you will spend the most amount of your time. is in your final cuts. This is what you need to focus on. This is what makes the difference between a very, very nice bowl and an exceptional piece of art. So focus on good, sharp tools, tiny bites, and moving as slowly as you can so that you can slice this wood as cleanly as possible. I'm going to sharpen up, flatten this base, and make a couple of final clean passes and see if I can't get this as nice of a surface as possible before I go on to sanding. I am going to put a recess in the base, and we'll talk about that a little once I get this shape a little more refined. So before I get to my finishing cuts, I need to flatten off the base. I'm going to show you a push cut with the 40-40 grind across the length of the grain, and that should be a fairly clean cut. I'm going to have to pull my tailstock away. At that point, I'm fully trusting the woodworm screw. I know that it's a good solid fit. It does not concern me, so that I can get this nice and clean. I want to try to keep this feature, but I have to get rid of this punky wood. It's a little bit punky right here, so we'll see what I can do. Let me get my face shield.
I'm going to keep this center as long as I can, but I'm going to have to pull the live center away in order to get a good clean pass all the way across the base.
Now that I have a flat surface, I need to set up my recess. You can sit and measure it out. This is a 60 millimeter chuck, expanding chuck. You can use your calipers. It's roughly 2 inches. You can come around and double check and make sure it clears. You can get all involved into this. You can eyeball it. I generally eyeball it. I'll use the caliper to show you the technique. Slowly lay it down. Set your caliper. In this case, I'm going to go a tiny bit. I'm going to go 2 1/16 inches. So you set your caliper at your outside diameter. And then what you want to do is start the lathe. You only using the point that is on your side. Touch the wood. If you touch it with that point, it's going to kick the tool up and throw it right back at you. What you want to do is just touch that, rest it on the tool rest, touch it, and it'll scribe a line. You get to the point where you aim pretty good and you can nail it pretty much first place. On a little side outside that line, that's okay. So that is going to be the width of my recess, my mortise. Now remember that I showed you that 3/16 is all the depth you need. When you're considering doing this, if you're going to put a foot, now I made this foot a little bit less. I made that at an eighth rather than 3/16 depth. But you want to get, about 3/16 depth. But you need to remember when you're turning the inside of the bowl that this is not the bottom. It's going to be that recess. So you're going to need to mentally relieve the inside of the bowl roughly 3/16 of an inch thicker at the bottom than you think it should be, so that you do not make a funnel where you cut out that hole. Now you can do this several ways. You can use your bowl gouge, you can use a parting tool, and of course with the dovetail you can use your skew or a dovetail tool. I'm simply going to make a quick pass with the 40-40 bowl gouge and then come back and touch it up with my skew chisel in a negative rake scraper orientation.
Don't forget to turn your speed back up. Turning around 900 to 1000 RPM at this point. And that's actually very quite comfortable speed. Remember that the inside here is slow wood. It's moving slower. If you understand the physics, it's moving slower than the wood at the outer edge. Move your tool slower so that you get a consistent cut. Alright, so I've flubbed that a little bit. That's going to be okay. Again, I'm coming in with my skew in a negative rate scraper orientation. And I simply scrape out. It's a little wide. You want it probably a little closer to the actual diameter, but it will be fine. It will hold. I need to raise my tool rest a little. You see I'm getting a little knob there. My cutting or scraping surface is not directly in the middle. I'm going to take a very, very fine pass right there. Bring it into the middle. And then just to show you where we're at, I'm not quite deep enough. I need to come a little bit deeper with that recess. Another way you can do this, again, remember we have a dovetail and this is straight, so you're still going to have to bring your skew in, but another way you can do this is to bring in a parting tool. Functions again as a negative rate scraper in this application. Then kick that little lip of the dovetail out. There we go. This is a little deeper than I usually do. This will hold the bowl. Now I can also take this, again using it as a negative rate scraper, and sharpen my foot. When this sits on the table, it will give the bowl the illusion of floating just above the surface of the table. Now it's time to take some finishing passes. I have my freshly sharpened 1/2 inch full gouge. Again, you can do this with the 40/40 gouge. This is just the gouge I use the most and I'm the most comfortable with. Now you can take the wing, do very light shear scrape. You need to take out any of those tool marks. And for that, if you've got it available, a scraper works best. I prefer on the outside to use the negative rake. Very, very lightly, just kiss those tool marks and work them out. Get into that little edge there. And I'm going to take one more very, very light pass and just fix this angle. I'm not real happy with this angle right here. You'll notice with my left hand, I'm simply holding the tool down. I'm driving the tool with the motion of my body and my right hand. If I get to a point where I can't move enough, I just stop, reset, rub the bevel very lightly. I don't want to push it in there. I don't want to dig it in there. Rub it lightly, come in, and begin to pick up that cut. Come back behind it, pick up the cut. I'll take a nice clean pass with that final shape I want. I have a little bit of a ridge right here. I'm going to shear scrape that away. I can use a scraper. You can shear scrape. Basically put your gouge just a tiny bit past straight up and down.
Okay, so as I was looking at this, I decided that I did not like the shape of the base of this bowl. So we're not going to get necessarily the floating illusion. I just took it down straight to the foot. So you could just say this is a footed bowl, or you could consider maybe this like a miniature pedestal. I just didn't like this corner. It didn't look right. So I took it back and cleaned it up a little. Now, I do have a few tool marks and some very light tear out, but really this is a very clean piece, and I will be able to start sanding this at 180 grit. It's not bad. I'm aiming for trying even on cross grain to sand at 220 grit for the first, but I need to step it back a little bit. Now there are several different ways you can sand. Obviously, if you take just a straight piece of sandpaper, you're going to get ridges in here. The solution to that is something like a friction sander. With a disc like this, it just turns with the motion. This one I've got to get a new head because it doesn't. The Velcro came right off. But you can also get sanding disc pads for your drill in order to have a revolving disc. What that does is it prevents the straight lines from sanding. See, these are tool lines, tool marks, very light tool marks, but you get marks from sanding as well. And the disc, the spinning, will have a good effect and actually take these marks away. When you're sanding, sanding is based on friction. The faster your bowl is going, the less friction the paper produces because it's just skipping across it. I don't feel like you get as good a sanding surface. I don't sand any faster than 500 RPM and usually around 350 or 400. I don't recommend you sand any faster. If you use the attachment on your drill, make sure if the bowl is turning towards you, make sure the sandpaper is turning the opposite direction. Sand in both directions. You've got to think of these grains, stacks of tubes, right? So on the end grain here, it's little pieces sticking up, and on the side, it's tubes, kind of like my fingers. So as you sand, you get those little pieces sticking up, right? And you get this face clean, but what about this face? Okay, it's not sharp on this face. So I sand in both directions and wear that all down. Then I wipe it down with denatured alcohol or isopropyl alcohol. You can use water. This raises those grains. It soaks in the fluid, the liquid, expands the grains, and then you sand it back again. After you do that the first time, after you pop that grain, you're not going to raise the grain anymore. After the first grit, when I wash it with alcohol, I use isopropyl alcohol. And the reason I do it is because it evaporates faster than water. If I use water to raise the grain, I'm going to have to wait 20 or 30 minutes between each grit in order for that water to evaporate before I come to the next grit. If I use alcohol, I wait 30 to 45 seconds. So alcohol is a little bit more efficient. It saves time. It does the same thing. It raises the grain. The first time you sand it off, Once you've done that, you're not going to be raising the grain anymore, but what you are doing is removing the grit from the prior sanding. So if I start this at 180, I hit it with the alcohol, that will raise the grain. It will also remove the grit from 180. Then I hit it with 220. Wash it with alcohol. The grain has already been raised, but what I'm doing is removing the 180 grit, so I'm not putting 180 grit scratches in the wood while I'm trying to sand it to 220. I wash it with alcohol between each grit in order to get a smooth surface. We're going to fast forward through the sanding. I'll show you the start, but you don't want to sit through all of that. It's boring, but I'll show you the way I generally do sand a bowl. All right, at this point I have sanded through 400 grit. This bowl is very smooth, it feels very nice. And I prefer, you can continue to hand sand, and there's nothing wrong with that, but you can also use an abrasive paste. I am using Brad's Workbench sanding paste. This is a very, very good product. You can find it at Brad's Workbench on Etsy. There will be a link in my description, and Brad's also got a YouTube channel here. He's also a wood turner. This is a friable abrasive. It's extra fine, and it actually gets finer the more you work it. So application is pretty simple. It's kind of a cream, a bit of a gritty cream, and the first thing you want to do is just work it in. Just work it in, and you'll actually feel it start to work, start to abrade. You'll feel it kind of soften, and as it does that, you know that it's time to move to the next patch and keep working it in. Don't be afraid to use a little bit of this. This is an abrasive paste. You want it to do its job. So give it a little bit of attention. This also gives you an opportunity to kind of inspect your bowl on the outside. Make sure there are no major flaws. This bowl is looking pretty good. It's a really nice piece of wood, and I'm pretty happy with how it's shaping up. So just work that in. And then the way I like to do this is using that part of the, you can see it's abrading already, but using that part of the paper towel, I will start at the same tempo that I've been sanding at, 324 RPM, and I am still at this point working the abrasive into the surface of the wood. So I'll go ahead and go back and forth and really make sure that it's spread as evenly as possible. Then I will find a cleaner spot of the towel and kick it up about 100 RPM. So now we're at 420. And I'll do the same thing. Again, this is a friable abrasive, so the more you work it, the finer it gets. This will take you well past 1,000 grit equivalent of sanding with a lot less work, but you do need to get it up to the 320 to 400 grit range before you start using the paste. If you try to do this at 120 grit, you're going to be here all day. It's just not going to work. All right, so you can see I'm still removing material. I'm going to kick it up a little bit, move to a clean part of the paper towel. I'm about 520 RPM. But as you do this, as you progress, as you keep flipping over to a clean part of the towel and increasing the speed, you will notice how much finer it starts to get. That's what we're looking for. You continue these steps, going up a little in speed to a clean section of the paper towel until the paper towel comes away with no residue on it. At that point, you're not sanding anymore. You're just burnishing. Usually, when you use this method, by the time you hit 1,000 RPM, or right around there, 1100 RPM, you're not removing any more material. In general, that's not always the case, but most of the time, by the time you're up at 1000, you're not removing any more material. So I am still removing material. I'm going to turn my paper towel inside out. Another clean section. Same. And then I'm going to trash this paper towel and grab a fresh one. I'm still getting a small amount of material, so it is still abrading. Fresh paper towel, I'm going to kick it up 900 RPM. We're about there. $1,100 RPM. We're just getting a not a whole lot. One more clear spot, but I think we're pretty much done here. Yeah, towel's coming away clean. And this is the exterior, the outside of the bowl, complete. This is with the exception of a finish. Now, I have two options for finish here that I'm well, I have multiple options. You have many options. However, I really like Brad's Workbench products. This channel is sponsored by Brad's Workbench. And so in his line of products, I have two options. I have the tongue wax, which you have to put on and then you have to walk away from while it's on the lathe and leave it there for about a half an hour so that the tongue oil can begin to penetrate the wood. Then you come back and buff it. And there's nothing wrong with that, except I don't want to stand around for half an hour while that tongue oil begins to penetrate and starts the polymerization process. The other option is tongue honey. Tongue honey is a newer product from Brad, and it is a thinner version of the tongue wax. It's still pure tongue oil, carnauba wax, and beeswax, but it's more tongue oil than the waxes, so it's a little more liquid, and it you can put on off the lathe. You still have to wait at least half an hour, but you put it on off the lathe, and then come back half an hour, 45 minutes the next day, and wipe off the excess. Okay, so what you just saw me do was loosen the bowl on the woodworm screw. Now, one of the reasons a lot of people say they don't like woodworm screws is it comes to this point right here, you lock your lathe, and you pull and you pull and you cannot break it loose. Now, this is not the bowl jammed on the screw itself. It is the bowl jammed against using the force of the tension of the bowl tightening onto the screw. And let's see if I can get it on it really good. Okay, so the bowl is tightening on the screw, and at that point, It's the pressure between the screw and the jaws. That's what's holding the bowl. And one of the complaints, one of the reasons some people don't like a woodworm screw is because they can't get it off. Well, I'm going to show you how to get it off when that happens. It's pretty easy. Simply loosen the jaws of your chuck and you immediately release that pressure. Pull it out, grab a pair of pliers or a wrench or something, and just after 1.5 or 2 turns, it comes right out just like that with your fingers. Now, green wood, this is dry. Green wood, it could grab. It might take a little bit more work, but you can see the indentation where the shoulder of the jaw was pressed into the wood. That is what you're fighting when you can't get the bowl off the woodworm screw. It's this friction right here. So if you simply take it out of the chuck, that solves the problem. The friction's gone. Then with a wrench or pliers so that you can grab hold of that woodworm screw, you should be able to just take it right out. So now we're at the stage where we're going to reverse the bowl and we're going to hollow. First thing I'm going to do is put the bowl on the chuck, and this is an expansion position into a recess, so I'm opening the jaws. I'm not going to tighten it down yet. I'm going to again bring the tailstock up, lock that. I'm going to loosen my jaws again. I'm going to put some pressure from the tailstock into the center of the bowl, push it up against the face of the jaws, and then I'm going to tighten my jaws. Now, you do want to tighten this down, but you don't want to really crank hard. Just like with the tenon in the demonstration I gave you, if you crank too hard on a recess, you could blow it out. It is possible. It's very difficult, but you can do it. And I know that there are many people out there, myself included, who possess the hand strength to be able to just blow that sucker right out. You don't want to do that. You want this to hold the bowl firmly enough that you can begin to hollow the bowl. Now here's the thinnest point of my rim. You can see it wasn't perfectly flat. That's okay. That's about the thickness I want that rim, and I have room and shape. Another thing I'm going to do is, as I begin to hollow this bowl, I'm going to keep the tailstock up for as long as I can for support. Now, let's talk real quick about hollowing. There are several different methods for support, and I'm going to tell you in my experience, the larger the bowl, you want to keep that tailstock in as long as you can, and you do not want to start in the middle. And the reason for that is this: especially if you're going to turn thin, which I'm going to try to keep this bowl to roughly 3/16 of an inch thickness. If you're going to keep that bowl thin, the more material you remove from the middle, the less support you have out here. So if you start by turning away the sides and getting that where you want it, including finishing cuts, and even if it's a really large bowl, sanding, before you remove this middle, that supplies support, because as this bowl is rotating, as it's spinning, and as you're hollowing, this bowl will begin to flex, and you can start to get some very strange things happen, and if that flexion gets too great, it'll actually catch and could shatter, especially if you're turning it this thin. So in order to help prevent that flexion and get as clean of a finish and as clean of a cuts as I possibly can, I want to leave the support of the core as long as I can. Now you're going to see that very quickly I'm going to have to get my tailstock out of the way, but I can still leave the bulk in here while I cut steps so that I have a place for my gouge to go, so that I can make smooth, clean cuts on the inside and remove material. I'm going to go back to the 40/40 gouge and show you hollowing with that, but at some point I'm going to have to transition from the 40/40 gouge to my 60-degree bottom feeder. The order of operations for removing the center is basically establish the rim to its final dimension. Then I'm going to start hollowing, and I'm just going to take steps. I'm going to take bites. So ultimately, I'll have what looks kind of like a pyramid, a conical pyramid with the center being the highest point. Again, I'm going to leave the tailstock in as long as I can. It's just extra insurance while I'm hogging out the bulk of the bowl to help ensure that I'm not going to give too much leverage. I'm not really horsing it out. I'm going to let the tool do the work. But if I do get a catch or really try to horse it out or something, what I don't want is for it to jump off the chuck. So keeping the tail center in there as long as I can helps prevent things like it jumping off the chuck. I'm going to take little segments, little bites, step by step, get this outside edge probably down to 1.5 to 2 inches deep. At that point, I'm going to have to pull the tailstock, and I'm going to have to start removing center material. Again, still leaving as much bulk as I can while I achieve the depth of the sides of my bowl. Tailstock back in. Got to put my face shield back on, and we'll get started.
So as you can see, that's relatively quick removal of material. I'm already to the point where my tailstock's in my way. Now the whole point of making the steps is what I'm doing is giving my bevel a place to rest each time I come in and enter a cut. So I'm going to come a little bit behind it, pick that cut up, and touch the bevel. You can see on the rim here, I'm not sure if you can see it or not, but I'm already starting to get a little bit of spiral vibration because I can't turn my tool around. So what's happening is I'm rocking between the cutting edge and this heel here. If I had the bigger heel, I'd be even having a bigger problem. My rim is almost to the point where I need it, but I need to be able to take a straight, clean cut and get all the way around, and the tailstock is in the way. So at this point, I've removed a sufficient amount of bulk from the bowl, but I have to get the tailstock out of the way so that I can use the tool appropriately. At this point, I want to kind of angle my tool rest in, and I want to make sure that it's pointed towards the center. I also want to make sure it's set at a height where I can comfortably reach the center with the tip of the tool. Although I'm not going to get there yet, I'm leaving this cone for as long as I can. I still need to be cutting right as close to that center as I can. And that looks like I'm just about dead on. So we're going to take a pass where we're going to start right here, pick up the cut, come around, and I'm going to have to swing the bowl gouge away from my body so that I can continue the cut clean, and I'm not fighting between the bevel and the cutting edge, and I can get a nice clean slice in there. Let's see if I can get a nice finishing pass here. Not going to come out, I'm not going to take too much from out here. pick up where I dropped it. Got to kick back. I got too far in front of the tool. Here's where, for me, I find my 45-degree angle grind on my half-inch bowl gouge, I'm able to easier control. I can do a little shear scraping here. Move up that corner. There we go. Now it's starting to look the way I want it to look. Is that the best technique? No, probably not. I'm out of practice using the 40-40 grind because I don't prefer it. I need to spend more time working with it. So at this point right now, what I'm doing is doing my best to get a good product. Now I'm going to switch to the Ellsworth grind just for demonstration purposes to show you a little bit about how it cuts a bit differently. This is a 60-degree on the nose, and because I don't have a wheel, I'm not able to get the wings as far back as you'll see some people stretch them, but I do my best. So again, I have to kick my right hand way out in order to pick up the cut, and the camera's in my way. I actually can't get a cut on the wall, but I will work here. We'll take some bulk away. The Ellsworth is pretty good at that. This is the same angle on the cutting tip as the bottom feeder, 60 degrees. The traditional English grind. And I'm actually going to have to reposition the camera so that I can get to these last few cuts. Well, you got to push your right hand out. Then I enter the cut, so I want to rub the bevel, pick the cut up, put my right hand out, and draw that back in. Kind of like pulling an oar. Let's take a look at that. So you can hear the vibration. I'm bouncing between, see, I have the full bevel here, or the full heel here, and I'm bouncing. So I've got to get my hand out even further. Or I can come in and do a shear scrape, very lightly. And I can pull that, take that out. So the reason I use the 45-degree grind is because I don't have that problem with the smaller shaft of the tool and the angle that I am able to get a good cut at. I use the tool that works for me in a manner that works for me. I'm not trying to sell you on doing a 45-degree grind. It's just what works for me. I practice with these other grinds and these other angles occasionally, Obviously not often enough, but I don't turn a lot of bowls. I do turn bowls. I love turning bowls, but bowls don't sell. Not very often anyway, not around here. Okay, so for the sake of getting this bowl done, I'm going to switch to what I'm used to, which is my 45-degree extended fingernail, or whatever you want to call it, on a 1/2-inch bowl gouge. This is what I'm most effective with. Find what works for you. All right, we're going to stop. We're going to take a look, and I'm going to check the thickness. And I can see where I need to come out more in order to keep my thickness. So I need to now do a finishing pass or two on this little section right here. I'm going to pick up the cut by coming behind it, rubbing the bevel and rocking the cutting tip in behind where I need to actually cut and moving into it so that I get a smooth arc. So, rub the bevel, push the right hand away until it starts cutting. You hear that vibration? That's telling me that I'm starting to get thin. I don't have any support out there. So the outside, and I can feel it, I'm touching the outside of the bowl. The outside of the bowl is flexing, it's wobbling. You can see a real fine kind of a spiral effect right here. Let's see if I can get you close enough to see that. That is the outside of the bowl. I'm thin enough, I'm almost where I want to be. I'm thin enough that the bowl is wobbling. Let me move you in and show you. There's a slight spiral right through here because that bowl is flexing as it spins. Terrible camera work. So, how do you counter this? Well, there's a couple of ways. The most challenging way to do it is to use your gouge because you're going to cut one-handed. Sam Angelo uses a piece of leather. Some people put a glove on. I will not wear a glove with a lathe unless I'm protecting an injury. I use Quad Zero or white 3M pad. This is a buffing pad, not a material removing pad, not a scratching pad. So I will hold the pad with my right hand clear. I'm clear of the tool rest. It looks like I'm not, but I'm clear of the tool rest. And I'm simply putting very light pressure in order to try to quell the vibration while I make the cut with my right hand. So my left hand's here, my right hand is holding the gouge. Okay, like I was saying, I'm going to take a white 3M pad, which is just a buffing pad, and I'm going to set my hand outside here. Using my right hand and my right arm, I'm going to make a cut and clean this little spiral up. Now, this is a very advanced technique. This is not easy. If you do not feel comfortable with this, I'm going to show you another way to do this. But with your gouge, touch the tool rest first. Use your thumb, help hold it down, and you can just slowly approach, get into that cut, and what I do is straighten my wrist so that my tool ultimately rests against my arm and gives me a little more strength, my forearm. So use that tool rest for what it's intended for, hold it down with your thumb, and very gently make that pass. And get some light in here. Let's see if we can do this. I usually just do it. Talking about it can be challenging.
So that's one way to address this, but I'm still having problems. Another way is shear scraping. Close the flute, very delicately touch it. You can actually shear scrape in both directions as long as you are very, very light, gentle touch. That's another way to do it. You still, however, have some vibration. The most likely safest way to do it is with a scraper. Now I'm going to use my negative rake scraper. It does not have to be negative rake, but I don't have a lot of room here, so I can't get the big bowl scraper in. Again, with my left hand and a pad, I'm just going to come in very lightly. I need to put a fresh burr on my scraper. I need to sharpen this real quick, but I'm just very lightly taking some passes with the scraper, and that's removing those ridges and it's cleaning that up. Most turners who turn a lot, Alan Lacers is who I couldn't remember yesterday. Is it Alan Lacer? No, that's the skew guy. I'm still blocking on his name, and I was watching him last night, British turner. Anyway, he turns the inside of the bowls entirely with scrapers, which I don't understand, but he gets a beautiful, beautiful product. So I'm going to sharpen this real quick, and then we're going to scrape this. I'm going to show you because I want to get this section essentially to a finish. And you can even go so far as sanding this before you go in more. I'm not going to do that, but a lot of people, because it's not that big a bowl. If this was a 16-inch bowl, I would sand all of this all the way to completion, including the Brad's Workbench paste before I continued. I don't need to do it here. But let me sharpen this, we'll do the scraping, and then we'll continue to hollow. Okay, I have a fresh burr on this scraper. Now you could use a standard scraper. It doesn't have to be negative rake. That's what I have that's small enough. This 1-inch scraper is too big. I'm not going to be able to get where I need to with the bulk of the bowl still there. That's why I'm using my 1/2 inch, which I have sharpened into a negative rake. Either way, it works. I'm not going to get into the whole discussion, negative rake versus standard. That's a different video. And there are other people who do it far better than I. If you want to know about negative rake scrapers, Sam Angelo just did several videos over the last couple months on negative rake scrapers and the wheres and wherefores. Okay, so pressure, right? And then just gentle. I'm just very lightly touching the scraper, bringing it up. I'm not removing a bulk of material. I am getting a very fine dust. And that's going to be sandable. Should be just fine. All right, we're going to continue with hollowing, but I do need to get my face shield and respirator back on. I'm also now going to check my thickness, and I'm just pretty much right where I want to be. Sanding's going to take it down 1/100 of an inch, and I like this thickness. I like where this bowl is. Respirator on. Okay, so now I need to remove bulk so that my gouge has somewhere to go and I can make the bowl deeper. You can see I'm getting quite a ways off the tool rest. I'm getting very far off the tool rest here, so at this point, the safest thing to do is bring the tool rest around a little bit so that I have better leverage and I'm not fighting, and I can get in there and get my depth. Tool rest is down almost, or the tool is down almost to the bed of the lathe.
And I'm drawing in kind of a rowing motion, the same motion as if you were rowing a rowboat. So I'm pulling up and in. Okay, I've got a little more thickness than I want down here, so I'm going to be able to come back and make another pass. It'll be a very light pass. I'm going to rub the bevel, push the handle away from me until I start picking up the cut. Now, right here, I have a problem. I don't have enough bulk gone, and if I go too far, I'm going to catch. The wing of this gouge is going to catch. So at this point, in order to get a good final cut here or do some scraping, what I need to do is remove bulk here. And I'll move the tool rest a little bit, lose some of my leverage, but gain a little mobility so that I can start getting this part of the bulk of the bowl out. I'm going to lose the center support very soon. All right, at this point, I can scrape, shoe scrape, use my scraper. At this point, I've got the bulk I need removed out. I probably could take one more pass. Let's see if I take a little bit more thickness out of here with a nice clean pad. That felt pretty good. I still have my little spiral, but that'll scrape very easily, and I did reduce the thickness, which is what I wanted. So I'm just going to do a quick scrape. Bring my pad back, set the scraper on the tool rest. Use the tool rest for what it's meant for. Now, at this point, I do have enough space where I can use my 1-inch scraper. Same concept. It's a nice clean scrape. Pretty good. It's pretty sandable. It's not going to take me forever. I don't have to break out the 80 grit bowl gouge. That's a decent surface in there. I still have a little bit of waver mark right here. Hold that down with my thumb. Pretty clean. I'm pretty happy with that. Okay, this is now in my way. It's time to remove this bulk. We can go back to the 40-40 gouge. Check my tool heights. My tool rest is a little bit high. Okay, so it does make a nice clean cut across. It's not bad. It's a good cut across. But where you can really remove is cutting side grains down like that. So the grains are all laying in this orientation in the bowl and it spins around, but I'm cutting straight down those grains, straight across it, by turning the gouge this way. And I can remove a large amount of bulk very quickly and safely doing that. So you can see I've made myself a lot of space. Need to bring that point of that tool rest back in so that I maintain leverage. And at this point, I don't have anywhere for my gouge to go, so I need to start coming back this way. Now I want you to notice as I'm making these passes, and I have that 40-degree angle there, the closer I get to the center, the further out, further left, or further away from the center, I have to swing the handle of the gouge. Right about here, I can't use the 40-40 anymore because I'm going to hit the side and I'm not going to get a clean cut. That's where the 60-degree bottom feeder comes in the best, the most handy, because the handle at 60 degrees, the handle stays out here. Likewise, the Ellsworth grind, remember it's at 60 degrees at the nose. Same thing. There's 60 degrees flat across the bottom. I can get this handle pretty much anywhere. So, depending on how much bulk you're at, where you're at, and what you want to do, as far as just removing mass, at some point the 40-40 stops working. You've got to switch to a different grind. Right now, I can still remove bulk with the 40-40 effectively until I get to about here. So what I like to do is try to make as clean a passage as possible and practice my technique where it really doesn't matter because there's not going to be any wood here eventually anyway. So here's where you do where you take some time and you screw around and you open and close the flute and see what that feels like. This is a perfect opportunity to practice your cuts and see what happens when I do this, what happens when I do that. If you get a catch in here, in the slow wood, as long as it's not good to ever get a catch, but you're not necessarily going to do a lot of damage at this point right now. If while you're playing around, kind of feeling how this mat works, right, and where that cut fits the best, if you get a catch, it's not the end of the world. You still have the bulk of that bowl in the way that's going to be removed. So this is a good time to practice and see, well, what happens if. I am not saying make yourself get a catch. That's the last thing you want to do. I'm saying start to feel around and see what might make it catch. You can feel when you start to lose control. That 40-40 grind is very efficient at removing bulk. It really does a good job taking a large amount of material off, but you can hear I'm starting to lose. I'm getting deep enough that I'm starting to lose that control, and it's time for me to start thinking about switching to my bottom feeding gouge. I'm going to do a little bit more scraping real quick, just while I've got this bulk out of the way, but while I still have enough bulk that I've got some steadiness, I'm going to do a little bit more scraping. Just want to make sure that I've got this outside just exactly where I want it before I really get into the big bottom of the bowl. That's pretty good. Okay, this is the 60-degree traditional English grind, what most American turners or many American turners will call a bottom feeder. You can see at riding the bevel at 60 degrees, I am clearing the walls of the bowl completely. There is no interference, and I can turn the corner and get a good clean cut. The bottom feeder, it stays fairly open. And you can even open the flute almost all the way as long as you stay on the bevel. You can see I'm a little bit high. I need to lower my tool rest a tiny bit. Now that was too much. Now I'm a little low. A little finicky getting your tool rest right where you need it when you're using this tool. Another advantage of the bottom feeder is because the way that angle, you do end up off the tool rest, but you don't end up fighting it the way you do with a steeper angle. It really supports itself very well. There's a reason this was the gouge sharpening used for hundreds of years. It works. Don't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel. You could come from the inside out with the bottom feeder. Be very careful. When you do turn that inside corner, it's a very small bite. And at this point, I like to stop often and start ensuring where my bottom is, where my sides are, so that I make sure that that one last pass doesn't go all the way through. Remember the ring shake that we turned away on the outside? There's the remainder of it, but it's going to get cut away, so we're not going to be affected by it. We have good solid wood, but there's the inside where that ring shake, what we found was. So that's good to know, but we know because it's not on the outside that it's not all the way through. So here is time to start figuring out where the bottom of your bowl is so that you don't go through the bottom of your bowl. Remember, saying to yourself, just one more pass, that's when you get into trouble and you end up making a funnel. Just one more pass means put the bowl gouge down. Remember, we have a recess on the bottom. It's higher than what we think the bottom of the bowl is. So, I want to feel and make sure that the sides are consistent thickness, but I need to leave the bottom just a little bit thicker than the side walls in order to clear that mortise. I do have plenty of room. Let me show you a way to measure it. Let me take my respirator off and I'll show you a way to measure it. You can do this with a lot of different tools. You can do it with your bowl gouge. But what you can do is take your tool rest, set it gently against the rim of the bowl, shoot your glance straight down and make sure it's straight. Okay, make sure that it's straight across or as close as possible. It's kicking out a little bit. Let's see here. All right, right about there, straight across. Okay, you can take your gouge, touch the tip to the center, and stop your thumb right at the inside edge of the tool rest, which would be the top of the bowl. Then come out here and hold it, and you can gauge, you can kind of eyeball. I've got a little more than a ½ inch. I want to get it down to about an 1/8 of an inch. Remember, about a 1/4 inch. I want to get it down to a 1/4 inch. Remember, where side walls are right around 3/16. It's actually a little thinner than that. But I need to make sure that I clear that mortise on the bottom of the bowl. So essentially, this width here is what I can take all the way down. So that's one way you can measure it. You can also get calipers. Look, if you just put your hand over the edge of the bowl, you can feel the bowl getting thicker or thinner, or if your walls are consistent, with your fingers. Your hands are the most powerful tool you've got, your sense of feeling. What you feel is very, very powerful tool. Trust what you feel. Double check. Stop the lathe often and double check. That is the biggest thing when you're turning a bowl and when you're hollowing it is, look, nobody's judging you. Stop the bowl. Stop the lathe. Feel it. Stop it and feel it. Take one pass, stop it and feel it. Take another pass, stop it and feel it. There's nothing wrong with that. If you want to make a successful piece, you want to make sure you take your time and get this part right. I'll put my respirator back on and we'll finish the bottom of this bowl. So, like I said, you can pick up on the sides here with the bottom feeder. Don't be afraid to stop, reposition, come back and pick the cut up. Take your time, nice smooth motion, and come back. Touch it up a little bit. You notice that bottom feeder stays pretty much open wide. Stop the bowl, feel, okay, I'm pretty thick here, I've got a nice, yeah, I've got plenty of room. Here's another sense you can use. Hear how solid that is compared to here? Well, here it's less than 3/8 of an inch thick, or less than 3/16 of an inch thick. Here, oh, that's easily probably closer to 1/2 an inch. Eyeball down, I'm going to set this in the center. I'm just going to look down over across the top here. Set my thumb. Rim, yeah, I've got probably 3 more passes to get down, but I've also got to get this shoulder. I've got a thick spot right here, a thick ridge. Now another thing you can do, when I know this area is thick, I can just put some pencil marks in there, and I can work to turn away this thick area. So now I'm just going to kind of aim for a smooth pass and clear out those pencil marks. Much better. Still need to come one more pass. Take a look, and I think it's time to switch to the scraper. I'm pretty much right where I need to be, so I'm going to switch to the bowl scraper and clean this up. And that's where this beauty comes in. I call her Babs. Start a little bit below, come up, that gets that little nib out. Now, can you do this without a bowl scraper? Absolutely. Yes, you can. Scraper just kind of makes things a little easier. Notice I'm using my 3M pad here. I'm going to grab my negative rake scraper. Alright, take my negative rake scraper and I'm going to work this little area right here. Going very, very light touch. I'm not digging the tool in. Let's take a look. I'm almost where I want to be. Put a fresh burr on this scraper. Take one more pass. Make sure I can blend this right in here. Very light touch. Fresh burr. That's it. This point, we sand. I'm not going to put you through watching the sanding procedure again. You've already seen that. I'll do the same thing. Start at 180. Wet it with the alcohol to wash off the 180 grit and swell the grains. Raise the grain, pop the grain, however you want to say it. Okay, at that point, once that alcohol dries, I'll step up to 220. Wet it with the alcohol. At that point, the grain has already been raised. All I'm doing is removing the 180 grit so that I'm not putting 180 grit scratches in while I'm trying to sand at 220. Step all the way up to 400, and then I will apply the Brad's Workbench abrasive paste. The way I use this is I like to put it on heavy. That's my personal preference. You can put it on very lightly. It's up to you. I prefer to put it on heavy simply because I want to make sure that I get it everywhere. And a lot of cases I do a lot of live edge or natural edge pieces where there are some nooks and crannies. I like to make sure that I get that in there so that polymerizing oil can seal those nooks and crannies. I want to make sure you do cover every surface thoroughly. Again, this is food safe. And it takes about 3 weeks for the tung oil in this to fully polymerize. However, you can handle it after an hour, after half an hour to an hour. Once that tung oil has begun to soak in, you can safely handle the piece. In fact, to be honest, when you do the buffing in that carnauba wax and beeswax, which are also in here, starts to set up, you could probably put salad without dressing in this bowl this evening and it would be fine because of that protective coat from the carnauba wax. So it's up to you. This is a great finish if you're making 30, 40 bowls, prepping for a show in a month and a half, 2 months. If you're working that far ahead, man, this finish is ideal because by the time you get that bowl to the market or wherever you're selling it, that bowl is fully polymerized, it's ready to go, and you don't have to worry about a thing in regards to that. This is water resistant. I never, unless it is thoroughly soaked with resin, I will never ever call a wood bowl finish waterproof. It is water resistant. Water can still get into the cells of the wood. What we're doing is our best to seal it with tung oil. But you definitely don't want to do something foolish like stick it in the dishwasher. Would be hand wash. I wipe my personal bowls
finished with tongue wax, I just wipe them out real well with, or tongue oil, yeah, tongue wax or tongue honey. I wipe them out really well with a damp rag. But I also, do things like use them as fruit bowls and things like that. So, you apply the tongue honey, and you go have lunch or go have another cup of coffee, you walk away for half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour, doesn't matter. And when you come back, you simply buff it with a paper towel and wipe off any excess, and you are finished. This bowl is complete, with the exception of letting this soak in for about a half an hour, 45 minutes. So there you have it. Once I do wipe it off and buff it off, I am probably going to put the buffing wheel to it and just give it a good carnauba wax coat, again, for the continued protective properties of carnauba wax. It hardens very well and is a very good protectant and will help keep this bowl nice and shiny. But there is, in as simple as a process as possible, a wooden bowl from start to finish. I did not cover everything. It's impossible in one setting to cover every aspect of turning a bowl. There are so many things to think about, so many things to learn, and so much to discover by practicing. The worst thing you can do if you choose to begin to learn to turn bowls is be afraid to turn bowls. The way you're going to learn is to do. Get your hands dirty, get in there, learn how to make the cuts, watch videos. If you have a Woodcraft or a Klingspor or a craft supply store local to you, see if they have wood turning classes. It is not a wasted expense to take a bowl turning class. I would really strongly suggest it. Find someone local to you who's an experienced turner who's willing to teach you. And there are so many resource videos on YouTube, so many world-class bowl turners who you can watch and learn from. If that's the way you learn, I can't tell you how many countless hours I have spent in front of the TV watching YouTube videos of bowl turners and learning and grasping. Also, don't discount the online classes. I took Lyle Jamison's bowl turning ABCs a couple of months ago, and it was a great class, and I learned a lot. Even though I've been making bowls for years now, I still learned. I learned some tips and tricks. I learned a new way to mount the bowl that I hadn't thought of before. Lyle doesn't like chucks. He doesn't use chucks. He uses glue blocks. And that was really interesting. It was a good class, and I learned a lot, and I've adopted several of his techniques. So don't discount that. Find a local turning club and join them. I unfortunately bought a house and moved far enough away that going all the way to the turning club that I was attending it's too far, especially with gas prices the way they are. So I'm in the process of trying to find a new turning club, or maybe starting one. I don't know. We'll see. But reach out, ask questions. I don't know a single wood turner who's going to tell you, oh, that's a trade secret. I don't know any who won't take the time to teach you if you are asking. And remember, just one more pass means put the bowl gouge down.